thank you very much. Carlos, welcome back to Madrid.
Thank you, Juanjo.
How did you
be
find
here
the
with
city?
you again.
How did you find the city? Did you experience
Actually, I found it
that?
pretty good. I'm glad that the pandemic seems to be past, and hopefully soon everything will be back to normal. Everything seems open. The city feels very alive and very lively. So I'm glad that everything is back to normal.
Now that we are recovering our lives, you have many more chances to come back more often. Great. So, Carlos, I don't know if it was the last time we met. Was it in Dubai or maybe in Castellón? But previous to that, it was in Dubai.
Yes, it was in Dubai.
And you were trying to find a way to tokenize your fund, Spice VC, and then you moved to Miami. You launched a new company that you're growing now. What happened in the middle?
So basically, in 2016, after spending a few years in the telecommunications industry here in Spain, first at Telefónica, and then in Dubai at Do, I was kind of looking for something new to do, and because my background was startups and technology, and also working in a regulated entity like telcos, I figured out that probably fintech, which is again is a combination of technology and regulation, is where there seem to be happening more interesting things. And within the fintech space, at that time in 2016, blockchain was kind of emerging as a new platform for developing financial services applications. So I got interested in the topic. And then, as somebody that has been investing in startups all my career, here in Spain and in many other places, one of the problems that venture capital has is that as an asset class, is very inaccessible. It's very difficult for people to invest on venture capital firms, and it's also very illiquid, which is problematic for everyday investors, right? Because if you invest and it goes very well, but you cannot, liquidate your position when you need cash, then this is a problem. And then, blockchain seemed to me like a good platform for solving these two problems, right? Like how can you give accessibility to people and provide liquidity? So together with a partner, we have the idea of let's tokenize a venture capital firm, which basically means issue a token on the blockchain that represents the limited partner interest in the fund. And we did that successfully to the extent that many people approached us to replicate the same thing, and that led to the creation of Securitize, which basically does this for other companies.
Wow. So trying to find out a solution for a problem for your fund, you actually started another opportunity. So what's going on in the United States and all over the world? Because now the biggest investable market is not the stock market anymore. It is the private market. So how is shifting value from public to private markets?
If you look at what has happened, 20 years ago when I started in the tech industry, companies like Amazon, I remember in 1997, Amazon went public when it was a 3-year-old company. It's a very young company, went public very early. The market cap at that time was $200 million. Today, Amazon, 20 years after, is more than $2 trillion. And most of the, let's say, growth has happened in the public markets. And being on the public markets means it's very accessible, right? Anybody can go and buy shares of Amazon and benefit from the growth of the company. If you fast forward 20 years after today, it's actually the opposite. Like another startup that everybody knows, Airbnb, went public recently when it was 16 years old. So it's very, very long time that was private. And when the market cap was 100 billion. So even if Airbnb is extremely successful, it's never going to be accessible anymore for everyday investors, because most of the money was made privately. And that's been a trend that has been happening since, let's say, Google and Facebook went public very late. That less and less companies go public, and when they go public, they're very mature. So the value creation has shifted to private capital markets. And that's a problem, because private capital markets are not accessible, they're illiquid, and they're very difficult for people to
Only for very deep pockets.
Yeah, you have to be some super, a private equity firm or a VC or something to be able to invest, and also to be able to hold the position for 16 years, right? So if you and I need cash, we can't just wait 16 years to liquidate that position, and that's problematic. So.
No, absolutely. And how can we use blockchain to unlock that private markets and making them accessible to everyone?
So if you think of blockchain as the next public utility, right? Like the internet was kind of the public utility we've enjoyed until now, and try to find a parallelism between what happened with the internet and what's happening with blockchain now. One of the things that the internet did very well was to enable the long tail of markets, right? So if you were, let's say, a restaurant, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you didn't have an efficient way to advertise, right? Because you couldn't put an ad on TV. Obviously, it's too expensive for a small business. You couldn't put an ad on newspapers because they were like kind of mass market. And the internet somehow enabled a restaurant to advertise in a very efficient way and to reach the long tail of customers. Like if you're a restaurant, you only advertise to the small community of people that will likely come to your restaurant. And as opposed to what people thought, the advertising industry was going to be destroyed by the internet, it's actually the opposite. Today there is more advertising dollars precisely because of this long tail of markets and companies that are advertising that were not advertising before. And the same thing happened with commerce, with eBay first, and then with Amazon, that allow small merchants to be able to efficiently sell. I was with the co-founder of Globo. That's the same thing, right? Like delivery for a small restaurant was not viable before, right? And then these businesses have allowed delivery to become very efficient for the long tail of business and restaurants. So, and the same thing with communications and with many other things. But the thing that was still not kind of enabled was capital markets, right? Like if a small business wanted to sell equity to somebody, or if somebody wanted to invest in a small business, that was not, something feasible until blockchain as a, let's say, public utility has emerged as kind of like the force that is enabling this long tail of capital markets accessibility.
I mean, one of the problems with advertisement, the market didn't disappear, obviously, but now it is concentrated in a very few companies which absolutely control the market. So do you expect with blockchain, the Internet of Value, do you expect a concentration in the future?
That's a good question. So when internet started, people thought that internet was going to be a democratizing force,
yeah,
and has been in terms of giving accessibility to new tools to people, right? Like advertising and things like that. But what has happened is that those tools have concentrated in new, let's say, gatekeepers, right? Before we used to have, let's say, telecommunication companies controlling how you communicate with people. And now, to some extent, you can argue that Facebook with, Facebook, WhatsApp, and Instagram control how people communicate. And actually this week that they had this outage, it became very clear, right? That without those tools, people don't know how to communicate. So hopefully the same thing doesn't happen with blockchain, but there is a probability that it might happen, right? Today, let's say how people transact is controlled by companies like banks and credit card companies and things like that, which are not as perhaps monopolistic as other industries, but they're highly concentrated. And there is a risk that this decentralizes the access, so it kind of democratizes access, but through new gatekeepers, let's say like companies like Coinbase or companies like that centralize the access to cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And hopefully that won't happen, but there is a risk that it might happen.
It's a risk. So do you see any regulatory risk, for example, in the United States where blockchain is growing like crazy?
It's not a risk, but it's a reality that is going to happen. It's very, if you think about today, blockchain and some of the new trends like DeFi, decentralized finance and things like that, is a bit of the Wild West, right? Like, you can transact with somebody without knowing who the other person is and transact actually huge amounts of money, right? And I don't think that this will last, right? Because this has a lot of benefits, but it has a lot of problems as well, because you might be enabling a terrorist organization to basically launder money, or you might be transacting with somebody in North Korea and you don't know, and someone in Afghanistan and things like that. So it's pretty clear to me that some degree of regulation is going to come, and is already coming. Hopefully, countries will apply regulation in a way that it doesn't prevent innovation, and it won't be like some dictatorial countries like China that they don't regulate, they prohibit. I think that's super negative, but Western countries probably will regulate without prohibiting and enabling innovation. The same thing happened with internet. So
blockchain allows us to make transactions immediately, frictionless, and in a safe way. Do you see in the future mixed transactions? For example, you go to buy your coffee to your favorite coffee shop, and you buy the coffee and a small portion of equity of the company you're.
Yeah, so I think that there is kind of for certain people, like let's say us here in Spain or in the United States, transacting and paying is actually very easy, right? You guys here have applications that allow you to pay, do peer-to-peer payments. We just pay a coffee and you just tap your credit card and pay it. So there's certain problems that Western countries don't have that blockchain doesn't necessarily improve, right? It improves other things like basic, like cross-border transactions or transacting with large amounts of money or doing borrowing and lending on other type of stuff. But then if you look at other countries, there's certain countries where actually it's not easy to even open a bank account. It's not easy to go and pay, and people transact with cash in a very inefficient way. And for those countries, the impact of blockchain will be very, very different than the impact that we'll see on Western countries, because for those people, it will be actually access to very simple forms of banking and payments that they don't enjoy today.
So and in this world without frictions and where anyone can make transactions in a safe way and immediately, how do you see the future of the fintech revolution? What we have seen in the last years is that a lot of startups from all over the world have been challenging legacy financial institutions such as banks, and they have done a great job. I mean, 1.5 billion adults all over the world who were left behind by legacy institutions now have a transaction account, and they have access to the most sophisticated financial services. Do you see a future in which not only the unbanked people are banked, but a future in which the banked people can have a chance of being unbanked through blockchain and having multiple providers of financial services without having a banking account?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think the impact is going to depend on where you live, right? So if you, I don't know, live in Africa and you don't have a bank account, or I don't know if you guys saw recently that El Salvador approved Bitcoin as a legal tender, as a currency in the country, and the problem they're trying to solve in El Salvador is basically the first problem you mentioned, right? People actually don't have a bank account, and people transact in cash, and they don't have efficient way for actually paying to each other and transacting with money. So that problem, we obviously don't have it here. Here, the problem we have is the opposite. We have gatekeepers like banks that are, basically charging commissions and controlling the flow of capital and money as gatekeepers. And what the impact for us will be actually be able to get rid of these people and transact in a different way that is cheaper, faster, and more, if you want, decentralized without necessarily a financial institution in between guaranteeing the payments, right? So I think the impact that blockchain is going to have will largely depend on where you live. It will help, bankerize some people, and it will unbank some other people, as you said, and basically transact in a different way. I have an anecdote. When I raised my Series B recently, because most of the VCs that I deal with, some of them are traditional financial institutions, but some of them are companies in the cryptocurrency space. And then some people actually pay me with traditional wire transaction, which takes like 3 days to arrive, which is ridiculous, right? Because this is not actually that somebody physically moves money. It's just like a computer that updates a ledger, right? So, and then some other ones actually pay me in cryptocurrency, in stable coins, one called USDC, and it literally arrives in like 3 seconds. So, the experience of like basically somebody calling you saying, okay, I just signed the purchase agreement of your shares, send me the QR code of your wallet, and then you send in the QR code of your wallet, and then suddenly you see X millions of dollars showing up in your wallet instantly. It's actually quite amazing, right? And that's a thing what will make people like us, which are bankerized, to try to move away from traditional financial services that are inefficient for no apparent reason, right? Except because they sit on legacy financial systems that don't allow them to transact efficiently. So.
Well, that's the funny thing about disruptive innovation. Now I'm remembering Christiansen, who passed away 1 year ago. Disruptive innovation is making complex and expensive things cheap and easy to use, and then accessible to the most. So maybe these solutions that have been developed for people who are unbanked, like in El Salvador and many other countries, become more sophisticated and become better, and finally they may surpass the kind of financial products that we use today, and which are based on protocols and technology from 30, 40 years ago. So
yeah, this is the problem, right? So a lot of people, and myself included, I don't understand why a cross-border transaction, like if you send money from Spain to the US, takes 3 days. It's just, in the world that we live, that everything happens electronically and through the internet, it's just like, pretty surprising that they haven't figured out how to do it in a much more efficient way. And I think this is part of the problem that, as you mentioned, Clayton Christensen described, of this disruptive innovation phenomenon, where cryptocurrencies today are actually, in some sense, maybe not better, because you have to carry a wallet and you have to know how to use it, and maybe the user experience is not as simple, but it is so efficient and so cheap that it will kind of disrupt these guys and will come from below, right? Like the young people first, or the people that don't have access to bank accounts will start using it, and you'll get to the point that it might be too late for traditional financial institutions to be able to shift to a better way of doing things, because it also disrupts their business model, right? I mean, it takes 3 days and they charge you whatever, $50 every time you send money from Spain to the US. If suddenly that costs 0 and it takes seconds, those banks need to figure out a different business model, which they might not be able to actually sustain the cost structure and the way they're set up today to do business.
So we can tokenize now any kind of assets. What are the fastest growing markets you see in the coming future? What kind of assets?
So I think that the crypto market started basically trying to replicate currencies. That's what I call cryptocurrencies, even though all of the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are not really acting like a currency because they're not necessarily good for payments and stuff like that. The kind of next wave that came were all these, payment tokens and utility tokens that will allow you to like transact within a protocol. And I think that started a trend that people don't realize, which is a way for rewarding people for participating on a network. Here in Spain, there's a very good example of a very famous entrepreneur, Martin Barsaski. He had a company called Phone. I don't know if you guys remember that they were basically giving you these routers where you could share Wi-Fi with each other. And that, went okay, but it just didn't really take off, right? Because there was not a lot of financial incentive for people to share their connectivity with others, right? And now there is kind of like the next generation of that. It's called Helium, where they actually give you these tokens that you can, accumulate if you actually provide this connectivity to other people. So there's a financial incentive for you to participate in a network, and suddenly these networks are actually growing much faster because there is a financial incentive. And this phenomenon is being replicated in games, in how people are treating with collectibles, with NFTs and things like that. So this concept that when you contribute to a network, you actually get some sort of financial reward is what blockchain is enabled, that is opening up very innovative use cases, right?
Do you have any questions for Carlos? Any from the public? So my last question, Carlos. My last question, while you think about your own question. My last question. So what we have seen, the fintech revolution has contributed to poverty alleviation more than anything, probably in the history of humankind. 1.5 people having access to basic financial services. So that's much more to what multilateral institutions, governments, NGOs have done for developing countries. So how do you think blockchain and the development of these platforms are going to help, especially developing countries and those people who were left behind by the legacy financial system to look forward, to a better future?
As I mentioned, this concept that when you contribute to a network in any way and contribute to grow the network, you have a financial reward for contributing to the network is something that becomes very interesting, especially for people in emerging countries, that they need to figure out how to earn money. There is one of the things that is now emerging on blockchain is this concept that if you participate on a game and help make the game better, you can receive rewards that are actually, you can convert into money. And there's one game called Acces that has exploded in the last few months, where apparently 90% of the people that are supporting the game and playing and transacting with the game are from the Philippines. And it's exactly because of that, because people there in the Philippines, for whatever reason, they figure out that a way for them to earn money by contributing to a network which is primarily being used for people in the US is by participating in this game and making it better. And then they get these tokens as rewards that they can go and sell and convert in actual money for them to pay, right? So I think that you will see a trend of people in emerging countries being able to earn money by participating and supporting networks that are maybe used in Western countries where people don't have that problem of needing that much money, and then they don't want to spend the time participating on the network. And the fact that these are global networks that are completely open, permissionless, that anybody can participate, is what is going to enable these people in emerging markets to earn money that was impossible to do it before. So,
do you think about any question, Luis?
What do you think about central bank digital currencies? A lot of people say those are not blockchain because it's not decentralized. So what's your view on that and your whether that will be a reality very soon?
So, yeah, I was actually talking to somebody that knows quite a lot about this, Julio Faura. Look, I'm a bit skeptical about, I'm very skeptical about large corporations, and I work at one, so I know, firsthand, innovating in anything, right? Because the incentive they have of, removing their position as an incumbent in an industry is very low, right? So, well, government is even worse. so the fact that the government can actually create something much more valuable than a private company or startup is just very foreign to me, and it has never happened in the history, right? So I think that governments should just do what they do, and then, probably by the time they come up, if they ever come up with a central bank digital currency, we will have stable coins that are produced by startups that people will be transacting, and that for everyday people, there will be no difference, right? So maybe for large financial institutions, the fact that that money has been issued by a central bank means something, but for the rest of the population, it doesn't mean anything. So I'm very skeptical that that will ever be a thing. Maybe in countries like China, that will be imposed by the government. It's a different story, but in Western countries like Spain or the US, where we have a democracy, that people can use whatever they want, then I don't think that that will ever be a viable solution.
As long as we keep democracy and freedom. We're running out of time. Thank you very much. A big hand for Carlos, please.